Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Amiyas Hashem today. We will be learning Daf Kuf Nun Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very bottom line of Kuf Nun Amid Aleph, Siman Shin Chaf Aleph Sif Tes Vav. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael, Hanisunim Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayom Bein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Alehem V'Yitziyah Mitzaru L'Rvacha, Me'afela La'ira Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta Bagala V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Fuhr Shalem, for Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malkachana, Vashamer ben Esther Fradl, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rivka Bashir Lech, Havadasa Basera. They should all have a Fuhr Shalem B'Basar Shar Chayli Yisrael. The limud Torah of Klal Yisrael should be a schus. The Rebbeinu Shalom should watch over every single member of Klal Yisrael, B'chol Makom Shehem. Okay, so as a little bit of a hakdama to the next two seifim that we're going to learn here, Sif Tes Vav and Sif Tes Zayin, they're difficult seifim. Part of the difficulty lies in the fact that we're just not so familiar with the topic at hand. It's not something that we generally work with and generally do, and therefore I think the metzias is a little bit out of what we're used to, what we're familiar with. So that's one level of complexity. But then there's pashut complexity in how to learn the Gemara, how to learn the Mechaber, how to understand the Rishonim in what they say on this topic. So I'm just going to begin by reading a Gemara to you. It's a Gemara on Daf Kuf Mem Amid Aleph in Masechta Shabbos. The Gemara brings down a brisa. Itmar, Chardal Shaloshu Me Erev Shabbos. Now those words literally mean mustard. Chardal is mustard. Chardal Shaloshu, mustard that you needed. K-N-E-A-D-E-D. Mustard that you needed Me Erev Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. Okay? Now, what is mustard? So, mustard is produced from seeds, mustard seed. They take mustard seed, they grind up mustard seed, and then they add various liquids to it. You buy a nice jar of Dijon mustard, it's got white wine in it. Also, typically, there's some water in there, and there's some vinegar in there as well. And then, depending on the brand and everything that you buy, there's various other spices. So the first step in the production of mustard is to take the mustard seeds, and back in the day, certainly, they would put them into a mortar and pestle, and they would crush the mustard seed with a mortar and pestle. Now, when we talk about kneading, when we talk about lisha, when it comes to mustard, well, we've been discussing lisha now for a while. We know that the malacha of lush is when you have a dry ingredient, and now you take a liquid agent, and you add a liquid agent into the dry matter, and you mix it together. That is lush 101. So if you're learning Daf Yomi in Masechta Shabbos, and you read this Gemara, this brisa says chardal, mustard, that's the mustard seeds, shaloshu, that you needed, me Erev Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos. What does that sound like? It sounds like you took crushed mustard seeds, you added in your liquid agent, whether it was the vinegar or the wine or the water, whatever it is, and you mixed it. And you did all of this on Erev Shabbos. So far we have no halachic issues here, because whatever you did on Erev Shabbos. Okay, now what's the chiddush? What's the brisa coming to tell me? Amar Rav says, if you needed this mustard on Erev Shabbos, now, memachai, you could go ahead and you could mix it. Memachai is a funny word. Memachai means to soak and mix. So, memachai bekli, you could now go ahead and mix it on Shabbos using a keli, avaloi biyad, but you can't do it with your hand. Now here we have a machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Rav says you can mix it with a keli, not with your hand. Amalei Shmuel. Shmuel said no. Shmuel said you could do it biyad, but you can't do it. You could do it with biyad, but you can't do it with a keli. But then ultimately the Gemara says, Amar Mar Zutra, les hilchasa kechal hani shmaitza. The halacha does not follow anything that we have learnt above. Ela kiha de itmar, the halacha is as follows. Chardal shaloshu me erev Shabbos. Chardal, again, that you need it on erev Shabbos. Lemachar memachai. The next day on Shabbos, you're allowed to mix it. Bein biyad, bein bikli. You could mix it any way you want. You needed it on erev Shabbos. On Shabbos, you could go ahead and mix it now however you want. You could do it bein biyad, bein bikeli, whether you do it by hand or you do it with a spoon. And v'noisen l'soichai dvash, you could add honey. So anybody who thought that honey mustard is a new invention, not a new invention. It existed at the time of the Gemara already. So you could go ahead and you could add honey to your mustard. V'lo yitroif. However, when you're going to go mix this concoction now, when you want to go mix up your honey mustard, you cannot beat it. You can't beat it like you beat an egg or whisk it very strongly. Instead, what do you have to do? Ela me'arev. You have to stir or fold. You can't go ahead and beat or whisk. The Gemara continues and talks about what we're going to speak about in the next sif. Shachalayim, if you're dealing with cress, which is an herb. Sheshachakon me'erev Shabbos, that you ground up on erev Shabbos. Lamacher noisel l'sachet shemen v'chaimetz. On Shabbos, you could add in oil and you could add in vinegar. Umamshich l'toichan amita, you could add something called amita. And again, v'lo yitraif, you can't beat it or whisk it with kayach. Ela ma'arev, you have to stir it or fold it. Shum sheriskai me erev Shabbos. If you have garlic that you ground up or crushed on erev Shabbos, lemacher noisel l'saychel pulugrisin. On Shabbos you could add in beans, you could add in grits, v'lo yishchaik. But again, you can't grind it. Ela ma'arev, you have to mix it gently, and that's basically what the Gemara says. So now, just going back to one piece here. Amar Mar Zutra, les hilchas kechal ani shmaitza. Elikihode itmar, the halacha follows the brisa that says, Chardal shaloshu me erev Shabbos, mustard that you needed on erev Shabbos, memachoi, you could now go ahead and mix it, bein biyad, bein bekli, whether you use your hand or you use a keli, v'noisel l'saychei dvash, you can add honey, v'lo yitraif, but you can't beat it, ela ma'arev, what you have to do is, you have to mix it gently. Now, I read you this Gemara, and the Gemara very much sounds, again, I'm going to repeat myself, the Gemara very much sounds like the scenario the Gemara is discussing is where you ground your mustard seeds on erev Shabbos, you added a liquid agent, and you kneaded it into one unified concoction of some kind, mustard, right? And now the question is, what could you do on Shabbos? Says the Gemara, says the Brisa, on Shabbos, you could go ahead and mix it further. You could also add honey, and you could also mix in honey. That's what it sounds like the Gemara is saying. Now I'm going to read the Mechaber, and we're going to learn the Mechaber the way the Mishnah Berurah learns the Mechaber. And we're going to see that the Chavetz Chaim is going to learn this Mechaber very, very differently than what we just learned. And by learning the Mechaber differently, it means he's learning the Gemara differently. Now, it's not because the Chavetz Chaim doesn't like our pshat. It's not because the Chavetz Chaim thinks that this pshat is a better pshat. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you in the Bir Halacha where the Chavetz Chaim is going to say that this doesn't make any sense, really, the way he's learning it. Why is he learning it that way? Because he has rayas beruros, he has very clear indications and very clear rayas from the Mechaber himself, both here in the Shulchan Aruch and in the Beis Yosef, that this is the way the Mechaber learned it, despite all the kashas that there seem to be. And then we're going to see that the Bir Halacha tells us that the Rambam learned Pshat very differently. Okay, so now let's take a look inside. Says the Mechaber, bottom line, Kuf Nun Amud Aleph Sif Tesvav. Chardal shalosh yomei erev Shabbos, mustard that you needed on erev Shabbos. Direct quote from the Gemara. Lamachar, tomorrow on Shabbos, yachal la'arvai, you're allowed to mix it, hein biyad, hein bekli. You could mix it whether you want to mix it with your hand or you could mix it with a keli. And v'noised l'saychai dvash, you could add honey and you could make your honey mustard. But v'lo yitraif la'arvai, and the next word says bekach, The Mishnah Berurah says it's supposed to say b'koyach. So we're going to read it b'koyach. V'lo yitroi v'lo orvoi b'koyach. You can't beat it or whisk it with koyach, with strength, to go ahead and mix it very well. You have to mix it a little at a time, which sounds to me like what we would call in English folding. Especially if you're talking about honey, you fold it in, right? Like a good old-fashioned cake that uses egg whites and a heavy batter. You go ahead and you fold it together. It sounds like over here you're folding the concoction together or mixing it gently, but you can't go ahead, you can't whisk it or beat it. Okay. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Let's see how the Mishnah Berurah understands this mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah back on the bottom line of Kuf Nun Amud Aleph. Yochal la'arvoi. So you have this chardal shaloshoy may erev Shabbos. The mechaber said you're allowed to mix it. Says the Mishnah Berurah. What does this mean, yochal la'arvoi, that you're allowed to mix it? What are you mixing? Says the Mishnah Berurah, b'mayim oy b'yayin. You could now on Shabbos go ahead and add water or add wine. Okay? So the first piece of information that we have over here is, we look at the mechaber. The mechaber says, chardal shaloshay me erev Shabbos. Sounds like mustard that you needed already on erev Shabbos. Sounds like there's already a liquid agent, right? Chardal shaloshay. Sounds like there's already a liquid agent. Says the mechaber, yochal la'orvoi. Now on Shabbos you're allowed to mix it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what are you mixing? Oh, you're mixing in water or wine. But, continues the Mishnah Berurah, and gives us another surprise. Va'afilu im loyinis arev mayim b'hachardal koydem haShabbos. This is true even if no water was added to the mustard seeds on Erev Shabbos. And it's pretty clear that what the Mishnah Berurah means is not only no water was added to the mustard seeds on Erev Shabbos, no liquid agent was added to the mustard seeds on Erev Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah Berurah. So what does it mean? Chardal shaloshu on Erev Shabbos, right? Mustard that was needed on Erev Shabbos. Now you're telling me on Erev Shabbos there was no liquid agent? Oh, explains the Mishnah Berurah, the niloi shachardal, when the mechaber and the Gemara say that this is chardal shaloshu me'erev Shabbos, what they mean is the niloi shachardal rak mitamtsis lachusa. When it says that the mustard was needed on erev Shabbos, nobody added a liquid agent. Mustard seeds, like many seeds, are oily. They contain oil. What happens when you crush them? When you have a jar of mustard seeds, you could shake the jar and the seeds are separate. When you put it into a mortar and pestle and you crush them, you release the oils. So now, when you pulverize your mustard seeds in a mortar and pestle, the oil is exuded from the seeds are reduced to a powder, and now, because of the moisture of the oil, it clumps up. Says the Mishnah Berurah, according to the mechaber, that's what the Gemara means. And that's what the mechaber means, chardal shaloshu me'erev Shabbos. It does not mean mustard that was needed on Erev Shabbos, meaning that you did lisha on Erev Shabbos, that you added a liquid agent and you did lisha. That's not what it means. What it means, chardal shaloshu me'erev Shabbos, is that you pulverized your mustard seeds in a mortar and pestle, and by doing so, the oil of the mustard seeds made the mustard powder clump up. That's what chardal shaloshu me'erev Shabbos means. And now when the mechaber says, L'machar yochal la'arvai hein biyad hein b'kli, tomorrow you could mix it, now is when you're first adding your liquid agent. Now is when you're adding, said the Mishnah Berurah, b'mayim oy b'yayin. Now you're adding your water or your white wine. Va'afilu im lo yinisar mayim b'chardal koydem Shabbos, v'nil shachardal rak mitamtzis lachusa, afilu hachi. Even so, even though no lisha took place with this mustard on Erev Shabbos, afilu hachi, still in all, shari achshav la'arev b'hamashke. Now, on Shabbos, you're allowed to go ahead and add a liquid agent to the mustard powder, and you're allowed to mix it up. Pella, pile plum. I want to make sure you understand exactly what we're saying here. According to the Mishnah Berurah, the scenario over here is, you took mustard seed on Erev Shabbos, you put it into your mortar and pestle, you pulverized it into a powder. You did not add any liquid at all, none whatsoever. You did not do lisha. What does it mean, Chadu Shalosh by Erev Shabbos? Well, mustard seeds are oily. When you pulverize them, they tend to clump together. The powder is going to be clumpy now. Says the Mechaber, now on Erev Shabbos, what are you allowed to do? You're allowed to introduce a liquid agent into this powder, and you're allowed to mix it. Now, you have to mix it with epis shinui. You have to do it. You can't beat it. You have to be ma'ariv it ma'at. You have to mix it gently, but you're allowed to mix it. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, I mean, this needs a lot of hezber. Why is this mutter? This sounds like Lush 101. Why is this mutter? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Dal Yedeya Nisina loy choshev lisha l'deyazu achi gabla. First, let's do the math. You've got your dry mustard powder in the keli, and now you're going to start mixing it with wine, with water. Well, the first thing you're going to do is take your pitcher of water or your bottle of wine, and you're going to pour it into the powder. Does the act of pouring the liquid agent into the dry agent constitute lisha? That was a machlokes that we had already a couple of days ago. Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, right? Well, guess what? The Mechaber over here, this opinion in the Mechaber, is following the Shita of Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, who's Makel, who says that no, simply adding the liquid agent to the dry agent does not constitute lush. So okay, so far we're okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. You have your mustard powder, you take your bottle of white wine, you pour it in, so far you're good. You didn't do lisha. Why? Because dal yidei anisina loy chashav lisha l'deyazu achi yagabla. Because this opinion in the Mechaber, is paskening like Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, that simply adding the liquid to the powder does not constitute lush. So far you're okay. Yeah, but now you're going to mix it. How are you allowed to mix it? And this that the Mechaber is saying, that according to this opinion, you're allowed to go ahead now and mix it, whether you do it by hand or you do it with a keli. Ein gibul bazeh. That's not called being megabel. That's not called lush. Why? Mishum de derech hagibul bechardel, because the way you do lush with mustard, and says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein b'shachalayim, and so too with cress, which is going to be the topic of the next sif, v'shum, and garlic that we're going to talk about in the next sif. Who are you, they trifa? The way lush is done with these kind of ingredients, with mustard, with cress, with garlic mixed with beans and grits, the way lush is done with those foods is beating and whisking. It's not done with gentle mixing. Tahainu shema'arev b'kayach. The way it's typically done is to be ma'arev b'kayach. V'kan hu ma'arev b'nachas. And over here, you're not being ma'arev b'kayach. You're not beating and whisking. You're simply mixing and folding. So you're doing a shinui. V'zeu shesiyeh ma'arev ma'at ma'at. And that's what the Mechaber means at the end of Sif Tezvav, that you have to mix it gently. Okay, let's just isolate the halacha and chazer iber the halacha that the Mechaber just said, right? Mustard seed, mortar, pestle, pulverize it. It's a shtickle clumpy. You did that on Erev Shabbos. On Shabbos, you're going to add wine. You're going to add water. You're going to add dvash, honey. So you're adding liquid agents to a dry powder. And now you are going to mix it. Sounds like Lush 101. Says the Mechaber, you're allowed to do it. Why are you allowed to do it? Because it happens to be, if you open up the cookbook and you take a look, how do you make mustard? How do you make cress dip or whatever this is? How do you make garlic with grease and pull? How do you do it? Oh, you beat it and you whisk it. Right? It says right there in the cookbook, do not mix gently. Whisk or beat with strength. Now, you're not doing that. You're doing a shinoi. What's the shinoi that you're doing? You're mixing it gently. Ta-da! It's mutter. If it sounds like Pile Plum, it's because it is Pile Plum. And how do I know it's Pile Plum? Because the Chavetz Chaim says so in the Bir Halacha. If you turn back to Kuf Nun Amud Aleph, at least in my Mishnah Berurah, and you take a look at the Bir Halacha Dibra Maschil Yochel La'arvai. Now, it's a lengthy Mishnah Berurah. I'm not going to do the whole Mishnah Berurah here. I'm just going to pull out some pieces from the Mishnah Berurah. If you go a few lines from the Bir Halacha, if you go a few lines down into that Bir Halacha, this is one of the beauties of an online share. Everybody could hit the pause button right now, and they could find the place in the Bir Halacha, and then they could turn me back on again. I'm the Maggid share that can be turned on and off. So if you go a few lines down into this Bir Halacha, you'll see the word ube'emes. Says the Bir Halacha, ube'emes, tzarich ian godel bazeh. This is tzarich ian godel. Heyachi tiru chazal etzem hagibol. How are chazal being matir? Lush 101. Tehu iser daraisa, which is an iser daraisa, al yedei hashinoy hamuet hazeh. Because you're employing such a minor shinui, tahainu she'enoi toiref b'koyach, that you're not beating or whisking the mixture with strength. How is it possible? How are we being matir this lush 101 with a shinui because I'm going to do it gently, not hard? Sounds like a pella. V'gam, and furthermore, the Bir Halacha is another kasha. Me Rambam perik chav beis halacha yud beis mashma. It's mashma from the lashon of the Rambam. Di'im yitroif. Let's say you don't listen to this sif in Shulchan Aruch. You didn't learn it. You don't know. So you follow what it says in the cookbook. And you go ahead and you mamish whisk it b'koyach. According to the way we're learning the mechaber, if you're going to whisk it b'koyach, that's mamish losh. That's it. It's a daraisa. You do it with this shinui of doing it gently. Now suddenly it's mutter. That's our kasha, right? It's a bomb kasha. How does it become mutter? Because you employ such a minor shinui. But now the Bir Halacha asks another kasha. It's very clear from the Rambam, or it's at least implied from the Rambam, that if you would go ahead and you would beat it, lo yehevi kiyam issa d'Rabbanan. It's only an issa d'Rabbanan. It's not an issa d'Oraisa. Shechashavu sham ba'hu perka d'mayri me'inyonei ashvusin. Because the Rambam puts this halacha together with a bunch of other things that are only also midrabanan. So we have two questions so far that the Bir Halacha asks. The first one is the most basic question, and that is the way we're learning this mechaber, and that means the way we're learning the Gemara in Shabbos. What we're saying is that really to go ahead and add the wine or the water to the mustard powder and beat it, that would be an issa d'oraisa. That would be Lush 101. It's mutter over here because you're doing it with a shinui. So question number one, how does a minor shinui, like mixing slowly instead of beating, take something which is also b'daraisa and make it mutter? How's that possible? That's question number one. Question number two is, you're telling me that if you would beat it would be an issa d'oraisa? The Rambam puts this together with Yisirei d'Rabbanan. So why are you telling me it would be also b'daraisa? Now, turning the page to Kuf Nun Amid Beis, and skipping a bunch of lines here in the Bir Halacha, we come to the words Gam Yikshe Ma'oid. So again, you can hit the pause button if you want. Gam Yikshe Ma'oid. There's another bomb kasha. Gemara Isa Chardal Shalashu. What does the Gemara say, for crying out loud? And what is the Mechaber quote from the Gemara? Chardal Shalashu. Mustard that you needed. Needed means you add liquid agent and you mix it. How are you learning a Gemara that says Chardal Shalashu and telling me that it means that you pulverized the mustard powder and it got clumpy? Everywhere in Shas, lush means to add a liquid agent to a dry agent and combine it and mix it. So how are you learning pshat like this? Skip another two lines. Says the Bir Halacha, Velule de mistafina. If not that I'm afraid, hava amina kipshutai. I would learn this sugya pashut. I would learn this sugya very pashut. I would change the whole halacha here, says the Mishnah Berurah. I would understand the Gemara as follows. Let's learn the Gemara pshutai kemashmai. You needed the mustard on Erev Shabbos. You made your mustard powder in your mortar and pestle, and then you added wine, you added liquid, and you mamish did elisha. You mixed it. And also in the next sif, when we're going to talk about cress. We're talking about that you ground up the cress and you mixed it with a liquid agent on Erev Shabbos. Okay, so then what's the halacha that the Gemara is telling us? All right, let's analyze the case. You went ahead, you pulverized your mustard powder, your mustard seeds on Erev Shabbos, and you added a liquid agent, and you went ahead and you did lush. You went ahead and you kneaded it. You took your cress, you ground up your cress on Erev Shabbos, you added a liquid agent, and you went ahead and you kneaded it. Now what's the Gemara saying? The Gemara is saying, on Shabbos, you're allowed to add another liquid agent, and you're allowed to mix it. So you already did lisha on Erev Shabbos. This is niloish va'oimid. It's already kneaded. On Shabbos, what you want to do is you have your kneaded mustard. It's Dijon mustard. It's got the white wine in it. It's got the water. It's got the vinegar. Now you want to add honey. You want to make honey mustard. You want to add another liquid agent, and you want to mix it. Says the Mechaber, you're allowed to do that. But you have to employ a shinui. What's the basis here? What's the backdrop of this halacha? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Now, when you want to further mix it on Shabbos, ein oise maisa lisha klal. You're not doing lisha da kvar niloish. It's already niloish va'oimid from before Shabbos. You're not doing lush. When you mix it now, you're not improving the kneading. You're not improving the lisha, so that somebody should say maybe this is usher because of lush. When you mix the mustard now further, what you're doing now is you're turning a blila ava into a blila raka. What you're doing is you're thinning out the mustard, which is really the opposite of lush. Lush, you make it thick. You're breaking it down. You're thinning it out. You've got your mustard that's niloish va'oimid. Now you want to add wine. You want to add water. You want to add honey. By doing so, you're going to make it thinner. You're going to make it more liquidy. Bir Halacha says you're going to make it so liquidy, you're going to make it royal shtia. Your mom's going to make it liquid. This is not called lisha. Ella, but kishu toiref yafe bekaf, if you would beat it with a spoon, yesh bazeh isura, that would be an issa derabanan didami lelisha, because then it would look like lisha. Somebody sees you beating a bowl of mustard with a spoon, it's a mechzi kalisha, because that's the way you would typically make mustard. You would beat the mixture with a spoon. So it's a derabanan. V'chol zeh shekasavnu muchach tezeu shitas harambam. It's muchach, says the Chavetz Chaim, that the Rambam learned like this. So now, to tie this up, we have two different ways to learn what we just learned here in the Mechaber. The first way to learn it, and it's really, to be clear, it's two different ways of learning a Gemara on Kuf Mem. It's not really two different ways of learning the Mechaber. The Mechaber is the Mechaber. There's nothing that we can do about the Mechaber. It's two different ways of learning a Gemara. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the way the Mechaber understood the Gemara was, and that's going to be clear. It's going to become clear that the Mechaber learned the Gemara that way. And if you go through this whole Bir Halacha, the Bir Halacha has rayas that clearly the Mechaber learned the Gemara this way, for whatever reason. According to the Mechaber, what it means is, you have mustard seeds. You pulverized them into a powder on Erev Shabbos. You did not add any liquid agent whatsoever. You didn't do any lisha whatsoever. The only lisha that you're going to do on Shabbos. You're going to add your liquid agents on Shabbos. Pile plaim, it's mutter if you do it with a shinoi. If you do it with a shinoi, if instead of whisking it or beating it, you fold it and mix it gently, it becomes mutter. That's the way the Mechaber understood the Gemara. That is the halacha of Sif Tezvav. The Bir Halacha is astounded by this. You're taking an Issa Daraisa and you're being matter it based on what seems to be a minor shinoi. Now the Chazon Ish answers that kasha. The Chazon Ish says, apparently, the Mechaber held that this is not a minor shinui. Apparently, the Mechaber held that if you look at all your cookbooks, the chardal is never made by gently folding. I didn't try it. I'm very tempted to go get a mortar and pestle, get mustard seed, and try this out and see what it's like. But apparently, the Mechaber held that this is not a minor shinui. This is a shinui gomor. And it becomes similar to other halachas that we've learned recently, where when you apply a shinui gomor, something that would have been asa b'daraisa could become mutar legamri. So the Chazon Ish says, so too over here. Somehow mixing it gently and not beating it constitutes a shinui gomor, and it becomes mutar legamri. That's the Mechaber. Because of all of the kashas that we have on this, the Bir Halacha points out that the Rambam Zicha didn't learn this way. The Rambam learned the Gemara in a much more pasha ta'ofen, and a halacha that we could much more easily understand, which is pshutei k'mashmai, chardal sheniloi shmei erev Shabbos. You went ahead, you pulverized your mustard seed into powder, you added a liquid agent, you did all of your lisha on erev Shabbos. Your mustard is now niloi shva'imid. It's already needed. Now on Shabbos, you have a problem. You want to introduce a new liquid agent. Well, that's not lisha. That's thinning it out, not thickening it. That's mamish not lisha. There's no tzad that there should be this daraisa here. What is the problem? There's a potential issa d'Rabbanan. What's the issa d'Rabbanan? It's mechsi kalisha. Oh, says the halacha, says the Gemara. Therefore, you have to employ a shinoi. What's the shinoi? Don't beat it, stir it gently. So there you have Sif Tezvav. And now this really carries over into Sif Tezayin. Says the Mechaber, middle of the line, top line, Kuf Dunam and Beis. Shachalayim. What is Shachalayim? Pirush Shachalayim ba'arvi taka l'shar. Whatever that is. Ubala Cretan. In Ashkenazi languages, it is Cretan, which I believe we generally translate as cress. Cress is an herb. It's I was about to say that it looks somewhat like parsley, but not really. The leaves are rounder. So it's a leafy green. It's a leafy herb. So cress shedachai me'erev Shabbos, that you crushed on erev Shabbos. Lamachar on Shabbos noisin yayin v'chaimitz. You could add wine and vinegar to your ground up cress. V'lo yitroif, but you can't beat it. Ela ma'arev. You have to mix it gently. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Samech, noisin yayin v'lo yitroif. Gam kein ritzon alarma b'koyach. Again, it should. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is that on Shabbos you can't mix it, you can't beat it with strength. That's what lo yitroif means. Va'atama kol kanal, and the explanation of this halacha is exactly the same as Sif Tesvav, right? Same halacha. It's just we're talking about cress instead of talking about mustard. And again, you could ask the same kashas really on the Mechaber. It sounds like you're doing Lush 101. On Shabbos, no, for some reason, mixing it gently constitutes such a shinoi, says the Chazon Ish, that it becomes mutar. V'chein le'inyan shum, and this is going to apply to the next case that we're going to learn about as well, the case of the garlic. U'berambam kasav shum sheriskai v'lo yishcha. You know what? Let's see the Mechaber. Second line down near the end of the line. V'chein similarly shum, garlic, shedachai, that you crushed, may erev Shabbos on erev Shabbos, lamachar noisein pol ugrisen. Apparently, they used to make some kind of a dish, which was crushed garlic mixed together with crushed beans and crushed grains. That's grisen, grits. And v'lo yitroif elamarev. And again, you can't beat it, you have to mix it gently. Now, this case of the garlic is actually an interesting case. I don't see a liquid agent here. You've got crushed garlic, and then you've got beans, and you've got grits. Now, the only thing I could think of is that the beans, especially, maybe we're talking about cooked beans. I guess we're talking about cooked beans. So there's a lot of moisture involved. So if you picture in your mind, try to visualize this. You have like a bowl of crushed garlic, which is also going to have moisture. Now you add to it, let's say you open up a can of baked beans, right? And you add a can of baked beans to it. You've got moisture there. Okay, so you're saying, Rabbi Weiss, a can of baked beans has moisture because it literally has tomato sauce and other liquid ingredients in it. Okay, but even if you just take cooked beans have a lot of moisture. You add cooked beans to this mustard, and then you add grits, you add ground up grain, right? And coarse ground grain. you add to this mixture, it's going to be a very moist mixture. So I guess lush could come into play here too. And you could imagine that when you mix this up, it's going to be a pasty, thick substance. So I guess that's why lush comes into play here. So says the Mechaber, the same halacha would be true by this garlic bean grits mixture. V'lo yitra, if you can't beat it, ela ma'arev, you have to fold it gently. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and samach. He just points out what's really a peripheral point here. The Rambam, when he discusses this halacha of the garlic, he writes, Shum sheriskoi. He says, garlic that you are merasek, which means to crush, I believe. V'loi yishchak, but you should not grind it. Umayri, and what the Rambam means by that is, b'mechusar dicha. We find, generally speaking, in the Gemara, when we speak about grinding things and crushing things, we find different madregas, different levels of how finely something is ground up. There's risuk, there's dicha, there's toichen, so there's different madregas. What the Rambam is just telling you is, if you have this shum shariskoi, if you have this garlic that you crushed, lo yishchak, don't grind it. Why? Because it's umayri b'mechusar dicha, because it's not ground so fine yet. To grind it further on Shabbos would be an isser of teichen. So over here he's not addressing lush, he's addressing teichen. Or what he's saying is that the reason you can't do shchika is because you just added grisen, you just added these grits, these grains to your mixture, and if you're going to go now and you're going to do shchika, again you're going to run afoul of the isser of teichen. Vayin sif yotes u'b'mashu kasav dusham. Ice cut and samachalef, the Mechaber said you have this ground garlic, lamachar nice and pull, you can add beans and grisen, a barabam isa, nice and l'soich pull grisen, ayin sham. The Rambam just writes it the other way. He doesn't say that you're introducing the beans and the grisen into the garlic. He says you're introducing the garlic into the pull and the grisen. Vimheim chamim, if the pull and the grisen are hot, obviously the Mishnah Berurah is just pointing out, if you're dealing with hot foods, you have to take into consideration siman shin yud ches and siman shin yud tes, all of the halachas of bishul. What kind of kalim are you dealing with? Are you dealing with a kli rishon? Are you dealing with a kli sheni? Etc., etc. Okay, now 3 lines down the middle of the line, says the Ramah Hago. So the Mechaber said, and he followed what seems to be the halacha in the Gemara on Kuf Mem. The Mechaber said that when you're dealing with any of these dishes over here, you're dealing with this mustard, you're dealing with the cress, you're dealing with the garlic. The Mechaber, in the first opinion, said that you could go introduce your new agents on Shabbos, but you need to do, and you could do it bekaf oy biyad. You could use a keli, you could use your hand. It doesn't matter. As long as you employ a shinoi, which is, don't beat it, fold it gently. That's what the Mechaber said. Haggadah, the Ramah says, v'yesh oimrim, but there is a yesh oimrim that is more machmir, that says, the lo ya'arev bekaf, that you cannot do this with a keli, ela biyad, you have to do it with your hand, which was the shita, I believe, of Rav, right? Let me take a look. I think that was Rav. Rav said, yeah, you could, Rav said, no, Shmuel. Shmuel said, right, you have to use your hand, not a keli. So this Mandi Amar, it seems to be following the sheet of Shmuel. And this is the Or Zerua. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut in Samach Beis, v'yesh oimrim koi gam al sif tesvav. This applies to the case of the mustard in tesvav as well. V'davka kishenais amashke b'Shabbos, but this shita that says that you have to be makpid to do it b'yad is only if you're first introducing the liquid on Shabbos. Avalum nasan amashke b'erev Shabbos. But if liquid was already introduced into the mixture on Erev Shabbos, mutal la'arv b'kaf ma'at ma'at l'deyazu. Even this more stringent opinion would agree that as long as you're doing it slowly and gently, you could even use a keli. Ois cut and samach gimel ella biyad oishi yananeh hakeli atzmoi. Or even better yet, don't even use your hand. Just take the keli and shake the keli and mix the mixture by doing that. Continues the Mechaber with yet another opinion. V'yesh oimrim, there's another daya that says, Tahad shari la'arev mashka b'chardel. This whole heter of adding liquid to mustard, Dafka shenesanai miba'oid yaim, is only if you already introduced the liquid miba'oid yaim. Aval b'Shabbos also lasis mashka b'chardel b'shom aktushim. But on Shabbos, you're never allowed to introduce a liquid agent into something like mustard or garlic that's ground up misham lush, because of the isser of lush. Okay, what does this Yesh Omrim say? This Yesh Omrim is perhaps the Bir Halacha's clearest raya that the Mechaber learned Pshat in the Gemara in Kuf Mem the way I told you. In other words, what just happened? The Mechaber said in Tesvav, you're allowed to go ahead and introduce a liquid agent into the mustard on Shabbos, right? And the Mishnah Berurah told us Pshat, according to the Mechaber, is no liquid agent was introduced on Erev Shabbos. The heter that the Mechaber gave was a tremendous heter. No liquid agent was introduced before Shabbos. No lisha was done before Shabbos. You're allowed to do the lisha on Shabbos because you're doing it with a shinoi. Now, that's a bomb kasha, right? And we saw the other pshat in the Rambam. Why didn't the Mishnah Berurah just learn pshat in the Mechaber like the Rambam? The answer is this Yesh Omrim. Because what does this Yesh Omrim say? This Yesh Omrim says, this Yesh Omrim disagrees with the day Rishona of the Mechaber. This Yesh Omrim says, no, you can't introduce a liquid agent on Shabbos if no lisha was done on Erev Shabbos. Yesh Omrim, the Hadashari Larav Mashka Bechardel, this idea that you could add a liquid agent to mustard powder on Shabbos, is only if there was already a liquid agent added before Shabbos. Disagrees with the first opinion. The first opinion said, clearly, according to the Mechaber, you could add a liquid agent to the dry mustard powder that never had a liquid agent added to it before Shabbos. You could do it on Shabbos. The Yesh Omrim says, no. You can't do that. That's Lush 101. You could only introduce a liquid agent if a liquid agent was already introduced on Erev Shabbos. But if there was no liquid agent introduced on Erev Shabbos, you can't introduce a liquid agent on Shabbos. Avol b'Shabbos also lost his mashka b'chad lo b'shamak dushim, or at the crushed garlic. You know why? Mishum lush, because it's lush 101. So says the Bir Halacha, from the fact that the Mechaber brought down this Yesh Omrim now at the end of Tezayin, clearly the day of Rishona holds not that way. So you can't learn the Mechaber like the Rambam. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting some tal v'yesh omrim the hadashari koi gamal shachalayim v'shum v'kamach koli haniskala el b'sif yodalid. This yesh omrim is going back on the case of the mustard. It's going back on the cress. It's going back on the garlic. It's also going back on the kamach koli, the flour made out of the toasted grain that we learned about in Sif Yodalid. This yesh omrim holds adding liquid to a dry agent. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the background of this shita also is that this shita paskas like Rebbe, not like Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda. This shita holds that merely adding a liquid agent is already lush. So all of these things are aser. And therefore, you could never add a liquid agent to a dry agent on Shabbos unless a liquid agent was already introduced on Erev Shabbos. Because if you added a liquid agent on Erev Shabbos, okay, now it's already niloish v'oimid. Now you could go ahead and add more on Shabbos. And then it would be mutter to add more liquid to mix it. Actually, as a machine, but you need a shinoi. What we learned in Yudalid, that by the toasted grains you have to add a little. You're only allowed to make a little bit. And what we're learning about today, you can't beat it. You have to mix it gently. Or like the Ramot sheet, you have to do it biyad. You have to have already introduced liquid on Erev Shabbos. What if you only added a little liquid on Erev Shabbos? Still, everybody would agree that you could add more. But that doesn't mean that you added 2 drops on Erev Shabbos. Certainly that wouldn't be called gibel. To add liquid on Shabbos would be an isser of lush. But this is only if you're making a thick mixture of blila ava. Ava blila raka lo shaykh bazelisha. But you're still going to have to use the shino that we're going to see about tomorrow in the Ramah, which is to add the dry ingredients first and then the liquids. Tesham hitir dafka baraka v'chanal b'chol zeh in chiluk bein lo'isa suda elu suda acheres. And over here, there's no chiluk made in halacha between whether you're doing it for la'alter use or you're doing it la'achazman. And I think we'll end up reviewing this Mishnah Berurah is Katan Samech Vav in tomorrow's shir. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshua's refuahs panas and sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the B'yeskel Tzedek b'meher v'yameinu amen. Be well.